Do you remember your dreams? I had a dream last night that scared me. I was running from a big bright light in the sky. The light was blinding and white. It was brighter than the sun. Everybody was running away, but I stared into it. I stared so long that I saw into the future. In the future, there are a lot more computers and no more genders.
California conservative groups say their freedoms are being violated by proposed legislation that aims to end the use of conversion therapy. That's a decades-old practice that attempts to change a patient's gender or sexual orientation through counseling. Lawmakers behind a new bill say it's potentially harmful to a patient's mental health. Conservatives say lawmakers are misrepresenting what conversion therapy offers.
Going after speech of churches, of religious organizations, counselors, and others, and telling them you can't even discuss this idea of sexual orientation, gender identity, unless it's the view we want you to discuss. You can't question it, you can't explore whether there's other options, or even from the perspective of religious individuals, telling them you can't talk about the moral issues implicated with sexual orientation and gender identity, unless it's the government's approval on it.
If approved, the legislation would declare conversion therapy fraudulent under the Consumer Legal Remedies Act.
In America, you would never think that the Bible could be banned, but that's in fact what could happen in California if AB 2943 passes. This bill would prevent so-called conversion therapy, sometimes referred to as sexual orientation change efforts, and add it to the list of fraudulent schemes under the state's Consumer Legal Remedies Act. AB 2943 declares advertising offering to engage in or engaging in sexual orientation change efforts with an individual is fraudulent business practices. If approved, victims of sexual abuse could no longer get counsel if they develop, as often happens, unwanted urges to engage in same-sex behavior or become gender confused. This bill would also make it unlawful for any person to sell books, including the Bible, counseling services, or anything else that directs people to trust in Jesus Christ to help them overcome unwanted same-sex attractions or gender confusion.
As a former prosecutor with the Attorney General's Consumer Rights Section, and as a prosecutor of the Consumer Legal Remedies Act in particular, I want to make it absolutely clear that the First Amendment does not prohibit banning fraudulent conduct. The faith community, like anyone else, needs to evolve with the times. The science is clear. When you look at the support list, it includes the California Medical Association, the California Psychological Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics. So the claim that the First Amendment can be used as a defense for promoting fraudulent conduct is a fallacious argument.
Study after study has shown that conversion therapy is ineffective and damaging. Science and facts show that being LGBTQ is not a disease, a disorder, or an illness. Our LGBTQ California should not be subjected to fraudulent practices which could pose critical health risks. And with that, I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Members, I rise in support of AB 2943. This bill simply says that fraudulent activities, no one should be able to profit from them. Conversion therapy is a fraudulent activity that has no scientific basis. I am thinking about young people and also speaking in support of this measure. Many times our young people are misled by things that they hear that they think might be true or might be accurate. And this year I introduced a bill that would help us support LGBT students, to help them not be impacted by bullying or impacted by things that might cause harm to them. I think it is important for us to declare that this is a fraudulent activity and that there are penalties for anyone who would profit off of it. And I urge your aye vote for AB 2943.
We have to think about the legitimate experience of people who have gone through conversion therapy and have said that this was a good thing for them. The other thing I think we have to consider is potentially the implication for the faith community. And I think maybe this bears a little bit of explanation. Is Christians do believe in spiritual transformation. Christians believe that we are all sinners. We all equally fall short of the glory of God. But because of what Christ did on the cross, we've been given a new heart, and we've been given a spirit that transforms us. And so Christians believe that across the board, and they practice that in their faith. Not everybody practices that faith. Nobody's saying that anybody is going to be forced to practice that faith. But they legitimately practice that faith, and there are books, there are conferences, there are areas where there could be a transaction involved, but are legitimate practices of a faith. And so look, as Christians practicing, we are in a struggle against sin, and we believe that is our personally held belief, that God can change us. God, I hope He can change us. I hope He can change us.
Assembly member, I'm going to ask you to please keep your comment to the merits of the bill.
Okay. I'm a work in progress myself. And so let me just say that, I think we should think about the implications, that these could be much broader and go into, the language of the bill. I'd like to work on certainly tightening that to make sure it doesn't infringe upon legitimate practices of our faith.
What your bill does and commercialization, particularly with respect to books and tapes and other things that are produced by religious entities who have a point of view that this kind of therapy is legitimate, that they counsel in their churches, they provide commercial transactions, but that's oftentimes within the setting of a non-commercial organization, meaning a book or a tape or the offer of that kind of therapy in the walls of the church would have some kind of a price tag to it to defray costs or to otherwise Could you please address that directly with respect to moving this point of view and this therapy into a class of speech and commentary that is prohibited from being commercially utilized? That question to the author.
I'm going to ask him to address that in his close. Thank you.
This orange, if I tell you that this orange will help you grow a foot taller by tomorrow if you eat it, and I give this to you, that is legal. You know that it will not help you grow an additional foot. Now, if I told you that this orange would make you grow an additional foot, and I give this to you, and I ask you to pay me 50 cents, that is what this bill does. Makes this a fraudulent practice. So as we think about this bill before us here today, I hope that you will too demonstrate the courage of your convictions and understanding what this bill does. And hope demonstrate that members of the LGBT community should be cherished, should be celebrated, and most importantly, we should be loved. I ask for aye vote.
Thank you. With that, Madam Clerk, please open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Madam Clerk, please close the roll and tally the votes. Ayes 50, noes 14. The measure passes.
The Statue of Liberty is one of America's greatest symbols. Yet, do we really understand its roots? What it actually represents? Many have speculated that the architect Gustav Eiffel, who was also contracted to build the Eiffel Tower, was a Freemason. In my research, I believe that this has never been proven. What some people may not be aware, though, is that the Eiffel didn't make the designs for the Statue of Liberty, despite being credited as a structural engineer. The individual who actually designed the statue was sculptor Frederick Bartholdi, who was a proven Freemason. Bartholdi claimed that he originally got the idea from Edouard René Laboulaye, the president of the French Anti-Slavery Society. This is no surprise, as the Statue of Liberty is currently claimed to have been a representative or a representation of the god Libertas, who was a god that was associated with the freeing of the slaves during the Roman Empire, as well as the personification of Columbia, which is an old poetic name for America. However, upon closer examination, it seems that the Statue of Liberty could have symbolisms that go far beyond the Libertas deity. For example, before Freemason sculptor Frederick Bartholdi was commissioned to design this statue, he had already designed plans for a giant statue that was planned to have been erected at the Suez Canal in Egypt, but it was never really completed. This statue was said to have been comprised of a massive draped figure holding a torch, which is a variation of the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the seven wonders, and is also a representation of the Greek Titan sun god Helios, or Apollo. If you're curious what Colossus of Rhodes used to look like when it stood, well, this is it. What's interesting is that the Helios is holding a rod, which in the Roman Empire was a symbol for Libertas, and was actually even used in the ceremonies for freeing the slaves. In other words, the symbolism between Helios and Libertas, it's tough to tell apart, because they both basically use a rod as a symbol. In ancient mythology, there was a god named Attis, who was said to have been resurrected from the death of the mother of all mother deities, Cybele. Now let me show you an image of how Cybele is depicted. Do you see the resemblance? Look at the Statue of Liberty. I mean, look at her crown. In my opinion, the crown of the Statue of Liberty can be construed as a mix of the crown of Cybele and the sun crown of Attis or Helios. So, could the Statue of Liberty be the combination of two deities? I actually think so. I mean, outside of the fact that the Statue of Liberty looks very androgynous, think about the actual history of the designer of the statue. What's even more interesting is that when you examine the ancient gods of the Mithra mystery religion, to which there's no surviving scripture of their religion, you notice even more similarities. Take a look. This is what their god looked like. And here is that same Helios type representation of the god, but represented as a lion. The reason why I brought up the Freemason connection with the designer of the Statue of Liberty is that there's a second Freemason sculptor by the name of Horatio Greenough, who is also contracted to make a very important symbolic statue for America, that being the statue of George Washington. But this isn't the only interesting statue that he made. He was also known for having sculpted a statue that he called Lucifer. And let me show you what it looks like. I was floored when I first saw this, because it's possible that the great female sculptor Harriet Hosmer, she may have been inspired by this Freemason sculptor, because 13 years later, in 1854, she made this sculpture that she called Medusa, which also resembles the Statue of Liberty. The Freemason-inspired sculptor Horatio Greenough was initially criticized for his controversial George Washington statue, and today it's often compared to Baphomet, the occult deity. Notice the position of George Washington's hands. In addition to that, notice that Baphomet is depicted with a moon, a goat's head, the torch of enlightenment, wings, as well as intertwining snakes. Not to mention that Baphomet is actually a personification of both sexes, as he's often depicted with woman's breasts. Ha, you see? The Statue of Liberty is also possibly a combination of two sexes. What's more, the Roman goddess Cybele, who was suspected to be the Statue of Liberty, is symbolized with a torch and the moon. What you may not realize is that in antiquity, the same god that was symbolized with a lion, goat, snake, wings, it basically fulfills all the symbols that can be attributed to Baphomet. If your head's not spinning yet, here's where things get really crazy. In antiquity, Cybele was the Roman version of the Greek goddess Rhea, who was mother to Zeus. In the Babylonian Empire, a near identical goddess was called Ishtar. Now take a look at the symbols associated with Ishtar. We have wings, the snake, the lion, and the owl. This is really interesting because in ancient Jewish lore, the same goddess is called Lilith, who is not just described as a screeching owl, but is also the actual talking serpent who offered Eve the apple of good and evil, well, at least in some versions of the Adam and Eve story. In Greek mythology, there's a fire-breathing entity called the Chimera who lives in the underworld and is coincidentally represented by a goat, a lion, and a serpent. Why are these animals so important? Well, these animals also happen to be the same animals that are historically used to describe a dragon. Ishtar was said to have descended to the underworld, though the reasons in terms of the mythology is unknown to historians. Also, the mother of all mothers in Sumerian mythology was called Namu, or Nama, depending how you interpret the sex. Also, the Sirius star system in Egyptian mythology is directly associated with the goddess Isis, which is basically the Egyptian version of the Jewish Lilith or the Babylonian Ishtar, or, as we're trying to make the point, the Statue of Liberty. So what happens when you trace Ishtar all the way to the Sumerian Empire? You actually get a near identical goddess named Inanna. Let me show you what some of the earliest representations of Inanna look like. So, the same goddess will be demonstrated may be the basis of the symbol of the Statue of Liberty used to look like this, and perhaps was later personified like this, and even like this. If you think that this is too much to believe, consider that some companies that cater to the elites, such as Alfa Romeo, well, they use dragons eating people as their symbol of choice. And just to drop one more interesting coincidence, the architect of the famous Goethe building, which is basically the library in downtown Los Angeles, and kind of looks like an Illuminati pyramid, well, he was also the architect for the Yale fraternity building, Wolfhead, which is the brother fraternity to Skull and Bones. And what exactly is their symbol? Well, it's a wolf's head sitting on top of an ankh, which is the Egyptian symbol of their gods. Look, symbols are important because they occupy our consciousness. Whether we are aware of it or not, our minds are constantly attempting to organize information. If all these symbols regarding the dragons are proliferated throughout the world with little explanation or information as to why it's there, or what its meaning is, or where it comes from, well, that creates a state of uneasiness. It's like a subconscious knot, a feeling that the pieces are just not fitting as correctly as they should. You can call this a form of basic mind control, because that cognitive uneasiness, that makes our mind susceptible to authority. I mean, that's basically the basic premise of hypnotism. We just confuse the mind until it gives in to the voice, you know, just the authority.
In the sky that alarmed me significantly, that took me to a place that I really didn't want to go. So I'm going to give you a close-up of this picture here. This is the moon and the star, as you can see here, okay, that I'm talking about, that shows up again on Ishtar's chariot. But what I want to focus on is this. There's a close-up, ladies and gentlemen. And what does that look like? The Statue of Liberty. So I'm going to take a little bit of a rabbit trail for a second and get uncomfortable. And we're going to find out who Lady Liberty really is. So we're going to go back to the French sculptor Frederic Augustus Bartholdi. In 1834 to 1904, went to Egypt in 1868 for inspiration. The construction of the Statue of Liberty began in 1878. So let me talk about this for just a second. How many of you were told in school that the French donated the Statue of Liberty to the United States of America? Okay. How many know that is absolutely not the truth whatsoever? Okay? Whatever they tell you, just forget about it, right? It just totally backs what you were thinking in high school, which is, why am I here anyway, right? You find out years later, you were right. But what I want to talk about here is this. The Statue of Liberty, when Bartholdi was pitching this, he was a sculptor, okay? And as a sculptor, he was trying to build something great that had never been done before. And so he went to Egypt to be inspired because he knew that in Egypt, everything was huge, okay? Everything was big, from the pyramids to all the different statues. Everything was super life-size, and he wanted to get that inspiration. Keep that in mind. Then what he did was he went around the world pitching the Statue of Liberty. We were not the first place that he went to. He was a salesman and a sculptor at the same time. And what happened is they went to America. America liked the idea and tried to raise funds for the Statue of Liberty, but they couldn't. They were having a very difficult time raising the funds for the Statue of Liberty until one gentleman in a local paper, decided to write a blog, or what we would call a blog today, or a newspaper article, basically ripping on the middle class, saying, hey, the rich cannot be the only ones that represent America. We need to give to this cause because we need a representation of freedom. And wouldn't you believe it, lo and behold, they raised the funds and they began the process of bringing the Statue of Liberty over to America and assembling it on American soil. Now, what's fascinating is if you look at the picture that's on your screen right now, I'm sure it's total coincidence, ladies and gentlemen, that the statue on the left not only looks identical to the Statue of Liberty, but has the exact same rays coming off what is arraying her head as the sun rays, representing the 7 continents of the world. It is the sun god that presides over the world. Oh, I'm not done yet. This is Attis. Now, Attis is somebody you need to understand who he is, because Attis was the priest or the main servant of Cybele, or Ishtar, or the wife of Baal, the sun god. And he, in their craziness, let's just leave it that wink wink, of what went happen in those times, is he castrated himself, then would dress up, cross-dress as a woman, and wear this hat. This is a close-up of the castrated Attis on the left and Lady Liberty on the right. What I want to suggest to you when I got to this part is I thought to myself, oh my goodness, is Lady Liberty really a lady? Or is it Larry Liberty? I don't know. But I'm going to let you decide as we do a little bit close up here, and you tell me if that looks like a feminine face. Ignore the long hair. Remember, the priest of Ishtar wore long hair, they castrated themselves, wore robes like women, and wore these headdresses. Now, one more better for you. Here is her face before it is assembled, and before you have the ability to look at the hair and be influenced. That's under construction. If I'd known any better, I would have think it was Superman. So you can be the judge, ladies and gentlemen, but this little rabbit trail here, I believe, shows us that not only has Attis, or the priest of Ishtar, and sun god worship showing up all over Egypt, all over Rome, all over Greece, and everywhere else in the Eastern Mediterranean, but is on our soils and has infiltrated America today and has literally become the epitome and the torch of freedom. It's bondage. Let's go one further. The 7 rays of the sun. Notice the nimbus, the halo of rays of the sun. This is an ancient pagan sun god. It's everywhere. This is not something they just made up. Helios, look at this. Holding a torch. He's the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Where did he get the idea of the torch? Ladies and gentlemen, he took a trip here. He took a trip to Egypt. He studied these things. This is what he saw. An over 100-foot colossus of Helios with this headpiece on of the 7 rays of the sun. Don't tell me that that didn't influence him. The exact attributes of Helios or the colossus and the sun god and all of those things show up in the Statue of Liberty.